In this video I'll show you how to remove the carburetor and take it all apart and clean it up for a VTX 1300R. In order for us to remove this, we will do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to have to unhook these two lines. Basically, you will open up the lower bolt enough so that there's enough play for the cables to slide out from behind the slots. There's a slot behind here as well. These cables will move out of the way. And then the next thing that needs to be done is there are two bolts, those two screws right there that you see right through there. The one that's closest to the carburetor, we're going to open that. That clamp is what holds this carburetor body to the intake manifold. Once we've done that, loosened it, we're going to go to this side here and we will loosen this nut here so that we can pull this line here with the carburetor. Once we've pulled this, the fuel line will come because it's already off the tank. Then all that will remain, and I cannot show you clearly from underneath here, are two radiator lines. So let me pull this off the bike and show you those radiator lines that we will then have to undo clamps like this so that the carburetor can come off the bicycle. Now that I've got the carburetor pulled away, these are the two hoses that I need to undo. Let me get that focused. That clamp right there. Generally, it's a clamp that's done by the general clamp, which is one of those pinch clamps. But I went ahead and replaced it. There we go. It goes out of focus. Yeah, that's the clamp that I'm going to go ahead and undo first. So that's one of the lines for the radiator, and basically it heats up the carburetor, brings the temperature of the carburetor up when it's cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the clamp from up on top, and then go underneath here, and then grab a set of pliers and pull that clamp down. Once I've done that, then this carburetor will become loose. And then I'll go ahead and pull these lines out from here. Let me get that pulled out and show to you how it looks like. So basically what I've done is I ended up pushing this cable all the way down, pushing it down till the rubber portion cleared the clips. And then once it pops out, you end up pulling this cable out. So you let go of that. Once that cable is out, you'll be able to pull this cable out. For some reason this does not want to come out. Basically you end up taking a 10mm wrench to this, loosen this out. I thought I had loosened it enough. Anyhow, I got the cable loose. Once that comes off, this is off. So all I did was undo this a couple times and we're out. So the only thing that's left that's holding this thing up is the vacuum tube, which is right here. It goes to the accelerator pump, I believe. Other way. Just work that off and you're pretty much done, other than this one connector. And once you've got this connector, is just going to require you to push down on these tabs and then this connector comes off. So basically you end up lifting the small tab up, and that comes off. Now we've got the carburetor apart. We've got the carburetor removed from the body of the vehicle. So now I'll go ahead and take this apart and show you the different areas that we need to clean. Okay, so I'm going to start taking this apart. Initially I said that this was the accelerator pump, but in actual fact this is the air cutoff valve. So that is what the vacuum hose attaches to. All right, so what I'm going to do ahead is go ahead and remove the vacuum chamber cover, and underneath that is going to be the diaphragm. Just remember there are 4 screws on top. It can only fit in one direction. There's this small tab and this bump out in the washer. And we're going to go ahead and remove the bottom 4 bolts. I've got the hex nut bolts on here. Basically I've done a factory pro kit, jet kit, and these Phillip head screws that were here started to go bad, and so they supply you with these nice Allen key style bolts so that you can actually remove them multiple times without having to mess things up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, after which we're going to take other parts apart. Let me get this vacuum chamber cover removed, and then show you what I've got inside of here. When you start working, you want to set up yourself on a towel or a white sheet so you can start putting away the screws that you remove. Like for example, those 4 screws that I've got. Just to show you, this comes off. There is a full spring in here. There are scar mods and other stuff like that people have done which require you to cut the spring down. I think the more reading that's been done, more work that's been done, especially on the VTX Cafe site, you'll see people advise you against cutting this. This is the chamber. This comes out. This is the needle. Pretty much I've got it's a plastic tab underneath, which has got a spring loaded on one side. You turn it up, that comes off. Again, there's people who have gone and cut this spring down short as well, but I've left it pretty much stock. My air box for the motorcycle is completely open. I've also have a face plate which has holes in it. So I've gone to, as you can see here, if I can zoom in. It doesn't look like I can zoom in, but I am 1 notch up from the bottom. Let's see if I can zoom in like this. Oh. I don't think I'm able to zoom in on this at all. But anyhow, rest assured, let me show you on this one. There we go. It's 1 notch from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom portion now. Let me show you what that looks like from inside. In order for me to remove the bottom body of the carburetor, I had to undo the screw that was held in place right here. So it's one of these. Once this comes off, you will see that there's a plastic washer, a metal washer, and then a lock washer. The lock washer sets on top, the metal washer sets on top, and the plastic washer is what goes up against this copper body, and then it goes on top with the screw set in. So with those off, I can then go ahead, turn this around, and remove the rest of it, pulling the hose through. And this is what this looks like from underneath. We're gonna go ahead and take the accelerator pump off. There's a diaphragm inside of this thing. Take that off. Again, be careful, don't lose any parts, don't over tighten anything, and then just make sure you take this one step at a time. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and take off the parts from here. Basically, you stick in a needle through here and you pull this pin out that holds your float in place. The float will come up, and behind the float is your stop. You pull the stop out, put these parts away so you don't lose anything. Then we have the main jet, and then we have the slow jet. And so I've already loosened the main jet. It's a 7mm wrench. So pretty much what we'll do is we'll blow each one of these parts out separately with carburetor fluid and compressed air. Using a flathead screwdriver, undo your slow jet. You want to make sure this is all cleaned out as well. Basically just carburetor fluid through there, and then carburetor fluid goes through all these nozzles. That's my pilot screw. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out too. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tool, close my pilot, count the number of turns that it had, so that once I set this screw back on again, I'm going to tighten it all the way by hand and then undo that many turns. So here we go. I've got this marked on the side. So it's 1.25 turn basically. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. And remember that when I reinstall my pilot screw, I'm going to go all the way down and then 1.25 turn back out. And basically what came out of here is a small pilot with a spring. And what's going to come out, there should be another, alright, I'm going to be a little careful on this, but there should be a metal washer and then a rubber washer in there as well that comes out. So let me get working on that and gently have it pop out before I begin, because the last thing I want to do is lose those parts. So this is the small washer and that small rubber gasket that I talked to you about. So when we are putting this back on, you want to keep in mind that the steel washer goes on first and then the rubber washer. Let me put my hand behind here so you can see the contrast. And then the rubber washer will go on beyond that when you're putting it back in. So just a small thing to keep in mind when putting this back in. So I'm going to go ahead and put these parts on the side. Our next thing is going to go ahead and remove this choke. So I went ahead and used a 10mm wrench to loosen this up. Now I'm just going to work that choke out. It's just going to unwind. When you pull this out, this is what comes out. One thing to keep in mind is never use a choke on the VTX 1300. It always stays in the closed position, or open position I mean, and then it stays stuck in that. What people have done is they've gone ahead and removed the stock spring out of here and they've upgraded it. And that's what I've done is gone to Ace Hardware and got a harder spring just to make sure that the choke remains disengaged. So once we've got this done and removed, our next thing that I'm going to remove from here is the is the air cutoff valve. So once I get that off, then I will turn my attention to the accelerator pump on the body of the lower body of the carburetor. So I've taken the two screws off. Once you take the screws off, there's a spring. The spring sets in the collar here, sets in here, and then this comes off, and that's pretty much it. So my carburetor had been sitting around for about a year and a half now. So that's why I'm taking all these parts out, so I can make sure everything, all of the gelled up gasoline has been removed. Again, keep in mind you do not want to lose any of these screws. So that's that. Now I'm going to go on and tackle the accelerator pump. So here I'm removing the 3 bottom screws. Again, all of this stuff is spring loaded. So when you're doing that, you want to keep it in mind. You don't want anything shooting off to the side. You want to make sure you keep the screws to each of the components with that component, because some are longer, some are shorter. So this comes off again pretty much straightforward. Looks like I have some gunk in here that needs to get cleaned out, and then this needle comes out. So we're gonna go ahead and hose everything down with carburetor fluid, and then use compressed air to clean out. Pretty much you can buy any one of these and spray it out thoroughly, generously, and then use compressed air to blow it out. So I'm going to get started and get all this cleaned up. One other thing that I did while I was cleaning it out, this carburetor, was to go ahead and remove the fuel line. And from in between the fuel line, there's this small screen. So this is what pops in to the hole. That makes sure that there's no big particles that run through. So it's a good idea to go ahead and clean that out, just to make sure nothing is gelled up, so the fuel flows smoothly. And then you can reinstall the pipe once all that is cleaned up. And now that I'm cleaned up all of my carburetor, I went ahead and cleaned out everything, washed everything out, wiped everything down. Now I'm ready to go ahead and reassemble the carburetor. Alright, so now I'm going to be ready to put this all back together. I've installed the plunger into the floats. I'm going to lower it into the opening, hold that in place, slide the pin through. That pretty much takes care of that. We're going to go ahead and install the slow jet. You don't want to over tighten anything at all. You're just making everything nice and snug. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my main jet. Use my 7mm donkey to tweak that in. Now I'm ready to go ahead and reinstall my bottom cover. I'm going to go ahead and get these 4 screws tightened. Now I'm going to reinstall the accelerator pump parts back together. The diaphragm's in. Make sure I get this squared in on top. Then these 2 openings go on top of that. Make sure we get those in correctly. And then I'm going to go ahead and get 1 screw in all the way to make sure nothing lifts off. And I'm going to go ahead and finish off these other 2 screws. The next thing that I'm going to go ahead and do after this is to install my air fuel mixture screw. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to make sure we get the pin, the screw, we get the metal washer in after that. After that we get in our rubber washer. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this upside down so that I can get that in there without dropping any parts. Use my tool, get to set it. We talked about closing this thing all the way. And now I'm going to back out 1 1/4 turn. So there's a mark right there. So come back out 1 and 1 1/4. And then we can adjust this again once we've got this on the bike. Then I can play with the adjustment. From here, I'm going to go on to the air cutoff valve and reinstall those parts. So here, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the diaphragm with the pin downwards. Next thing that sets on top is this. And then after this, you want to make sure that this is pointing upwards, like that. And then we're going to go ahead and install the screw in. I'm going to put this in all the way. I'm going to go ahead and finish off putting that screw in. Now that I've got most of this all put together, I'm going to go ahead and put this lever back on the accelerator pump. So this rubber grommet goes in from in this direction. But I'm going to go put that back. Lock washer, metal washer, then the plastic washer. This drops down on top, and then just go ahead and simply tighten the screw. And voila. Basically it pushes down on the accelerator pump, and that's it. Pretty much we're good to go. So now the last thing left is to reinstall the vacuum chamber parts, and then we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the needle in. I'm going to grab a hold of the needle from the back. If you were to drop this in, this is going to flip on you. So you just want to hold it in place, get it in place, and then one small turn and it locks itself in place. So now that I've got this pin in, I'm going to go ahead and drop it into place. Goes through that hole. It's in. I'm going to turn this around so that I get this nib to its correct location. I'm going to turn this backwards so that it folds up properly. This tab is what goes right over that nib. Once you've got that in place, I'm going to go ahead and install the 4 screws. One thing I failed to mention earlier on, before you put the cap back on, you want to put this spring back in. And the spring goes around here on the back side of the cap. You'll probably find it easier to put one screw in all the way so that you can actually let go of the top and put the rest of the screws in. One last item that's left now to do is to reinstall the choke. Alright, so install the plunger in. Okay, so that's started. Finish it off by I find it a lot easier to go ahead and do it like this. Once you've got it done, just make sure it's nice and snug, and that's it. So pretty much we've gone ahead and taken the carburetor apart, cleaned it up, and ready to be reinstalled into the bike. Everything's nice and clean and pointing in the direction that it should be. Alright, so now that we've got the carburetor put back together, we're going to go ahead and reinstall. We're going to go ahead and put this back in. You want to come in here, clean that up. That's going to be the intake. These two lines are the radiator hose, coolant lines. They're going to attach to these two small ports right here. So the first thing we're going to do is fish the choke cable and the fuel line to the other side. We're going to pull the accelerator cable towards the right side. I'm going to go ahead and connect those two hoses first. Once you've made sure that the hoses are on tight and the clamps are good, that's when you're going to go ahead and push the body of the carburetor into the opening and seat it properly so that you can go in there and tighten that screw that chokes up the collar and holds the carburetor in place. So let me get started and we'll go from there. So I've got the radiator, the two coolant lines attached. Now before I go ahead and put this in, I went ahead and put this cable in, the rear cable. This is the cable that pulls back your throttle. You slip the pin in, and then you may end up having to lower this nut a little bit in order to get this around. Now the next thing would be to install the pull cable, and for that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to rotate this, and I'm going to need both hands to do it, so I'm going to go ahead and put the camera down after I explain it. So basically we're going to rotate this so that this loop is further up. I'm going to install the pin in, and then the cable will loop, and then I can slide this into here. Once that is seated, then basically I will just snug these bolts up to one another so that the cable is in place before I put it in. Final tensioning will be done once I've got the carburetor secured in place so that nothing moves. So let me get this cable installed. I've got the cables installed, so now the next thing is going to be to install the body of the carburetor into the sleeve. You want to keep in mind there's a small nib you see right there. It's out of focus, but it goes into let me see if I can focus. It goes into a notch right there. So basically you end up holding it in place, put the bottom in first, wiggle it around, and it is now in place. But you can see that metal nib right there where the top of the shadow of my nail, that's in place, and the carburetor is pretty much snug. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that screw. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead reinstall the vacuum hose to this line right here. We're going to go ahead and make the electrical connection, and we're pretty much done at that point. Alright, I've got the carburetor on, plugged in, cables are all set, they're moving freely, there's no slack, they're not loose at all, and they're not over tight, so that's good. I've got the bottom two cooler lines connected well. Got the choke cable going backwards. I've got the fuel line going back, and then on the other side I've got the choke installed. The nut is tightened, the fuel line is here, and I'm all ready to go ahead and reinstall the rest of the tank, then the air box, then the tank, and hook up the lines, and we should be good to go. Just make sure that you have your clamp that goes on here, and this side here does not need a clamp, so we're good to go on that side. So I hope that this video will give you some help into opening up your carburetor and cleaning it up, and then reinstalling it. If you've got any questions, post below. There are some very wonderful sites like the VTX Cafe, and then also Bare Ass Choppers, I believe, also has a good video on the carburetor. Anyhow, let me know if you got any questions. I hope this helped. Let me know. Like the video if it's helpful to you. Thank you.